my guardian angel, my muse, I don't know. Hi guys. So today I thought I would broach the topic of discipline because it represents a vast and ongoing challenge in my own artistic and spiritual and professional practice, particularly if you are self-employed or aspiring to be, and you don't have a boss, but also because ultimately no one is going to discipline you, or if they do, it probably won't be what you truly need in terms of your creative practice or your spiritual practice, things like that. So, discipline, in childhood at least, always comes from an external source. And in our Western culture, at least, we are immediately funneled into school and have to align ourselves with our parents' schedules and school schedules. And basically, bottom line is we get separated or dissociated from our natural organic rhythms, I think, much of the time. And I found when I graduated from school, when I dropped out of school the first time, because for me, school was my main source of structure for many years. I went to college and then I dropped out of college and then I went back to college basically because in that interim, I didn't really know how to handle all the space. I didn't know what to do with all the space. I had jobs, but they didn't give me the sense of meaning I was looking for. They didn't they were jobs, they didn't use my creative energy. We get disconnected from our intuitive sense of our personal rhythm. So I think the way to begin finding our way back, and of course the caveat that will remain unspoken after I speak it this one time, is that everybody has different circumstances. Some of you may be lucky enough to have the support of a partner or only have to work part-time. Some of you may be supporting yourselves, supporting children, and have very, very little free time. So everything I say always needs to be filtered through the realities that you have to grapple with in your life. Use what I'm saying that's useful to you and let go of the rest. Tapping in first to your physical needs and your body, that's the first guideline. So for me, that took a lot of trial and error, and it has shifted over different periods in my life, depending on where I'm living, who I'm living with, what kind of job I'm working, my age at the time. I used to, not too long ago, intentionally keep myself up most of the night, because for me the night was a calming time and it was also a creative time. I have shifted, and this also has to do with my environment, I have shifted to getting up in the morning, not particularly early, but getting my groove on around 8:30, and working in the morning, doing my creative work in the morning, and then moving on to more logistical and admin stuff in the afternoon. You have to tune into when your creative time is and when you are available to be able to utilize it. So that's the first step. And then the next point is to prioritize. I came to the decision not too long ago that if my creative practice and my spiritual practice were indeed my priorities, then that meant that they came first in my daily schedule. Again, see caveat, you have to work around your life. I have the flexibility in my life right now. So I begin my day with my spiritual practice and follow that with my creative practice. Sometimes the two are the same. Sometimes I jump right in. There's different ways that looks, but for me, attending to my priorities first means that I know that they get done. So the first thing about discipline in my mind is that it's something that is important enough to me that I am willing to make sacrifices in order to show up on a regular basis. I have found that regular basis does not necessarily mean every single day. For some things it might. For me, meditation is every single day. It's the way I settle. It's important to me. And though I do still ebb and flow with it, I strive every day to do some sort of stillness practice specifically. One of my favorite writers, Jeanette Winterson, she has a book called Art Objects, I think is where I read this. And that's a collection of essays. And in it, she mentions that she's discussing art and what art is and how art resides in this society, which is a very difficult and tricky position right now. I'll surmise it in this video to say that the forces of materialism and leaning towards a more rational mindset as the figurehead of reality has put art in a precarious position. And also, of course, with the technology and everything else, that's constantly changing, and there's a lot of opportunities. And as women, we have far more opportunities in the West than we ever did before. But what she said was that she does not write every day. She gardens every day, she thinks every day, she reads every day. But for her, there's a different sort of a rhythm as a writer she tunes into, and it requires space. And a thing that I know mentions in that book, and that I have heard other artists mention, and it really sinks into me and bodes contemplation, that an artist's job is to cultivate readiness. So the discipline is actually to make yourself available to receive. And yes, I know this sounds lofty and idealistic, but on a more concrete level, making yourself available means that you're not researching things on the internet. You don't have your phone on so that it's going to distract you. That you create open spaces regularly. And the more committed you are, the more I think this means that the higher level of commitment is required. If everything pertains in your life, if you can see everything through the lens of your creative practice, then that goes a long way also. You might be working your job, you might be doing the dishes, and if your antennas are tuned to your creative practice, to your spiritual practice, then all of that can feed in. So that's another thing, is tuning your antenna. So showing up. Clock time is a dangerous one. I have tended towards too much rigidity in the recent past. There's a pendulum, I think perhaps I would venture to say for all of us, where you go too tight, too tight, too tight, too much discipline, too loose, too loose, too loose. And I think it's, as time goes by, you can kind of start finding that sweet spot. I have had a tendency of, in the recent years, to get too fanatical. I became very, very rigid and even dogmatic about how I spent every hour of the day. It also seemed a necessity because I had a day job, I didn't have a lot of extra time, and I really wanted to make being an artist and also being devoted to my spiritual practice real in my life. So I went way rigid. And I have found that watching the numbers on the clock for me is not helpful. What is more helpful is having a little bit of a looser way of holding the day. Breaking the day into, basically by the sun, by the movement of nature around me is a better way to break things out, and also the rhythms of the body. So you wake up in the morning, there's the morning. Then at some point you have breakfast, whatever else, there's the morning. Then at some point you get hungry and you need to take a break. There's another natural dividing point if you're in touch with your body, if you're willing to listen. And then at some point the sun starts to go down, and that changes everything. Take into account these larger chunks of the day, and where is your space of time? If you have kids, obviously, when they're in school, nab that free time, carve a little bit of it out. What goes with this is also carving out space. For the first time in my life, I have an entire 3-story house all to myself. I'm in my 3rd month. And for years, I've been living in my studio. And that means my bed's over here, my painting area is over here, and my office and my work area is over there. You carve out what you can. It might just be a little table somewhere. You might have a shed outside that's perhaps heated. You see where I'm going. I think having a designated space, get creative, hang some curtains up. Having a designated creative space is extremely helpful. Not having to clean everything up. You can adjust your practice. It might not be ideal at first. I have been longing to have an entire studio only dedicated to art, where I can just splatter paint around, where I can rub paint on everything, where it does not matter if I am screaming at the canvas, if I am screaming at my keyboard. I've accomplished different fragments of that at different points in my life, but again, point being, work with what you have, but set aside a special place for your creative practice. So once you have a space and you have a sense of when you would like to show up for your practice, what I have found works for me is to set a finite goal, a small goal, and then check in at intervals about how that goal is going. I tend to work with every 3 months, the season changes, so that's a good check-in. How are things going? Am I actually showing up? Etc. Am I actually doing my practice? Am I satisfied or am I disappointed? The other thing that goes with this is start small. Really, it's the showing up that is the most crucial thing. And then again, finding a sweet spot. For me, the sweet spot for a long time now has been 20 minutes. And I actually, as I said, I do not, the actual clock numbers tend to make me a little bit neurotic about controlling that time and, oh gosh, it's already this time and that. So having a sand timer, a 20-minute sand timer that I turn over, and I actually put it out of sight so I can't just sit there watching it, is extremely helpful. And I just make my goal to have that timing that timer there, and that I will sit there if need be, just sit there, but that I will sit there in my creative space and be available. I recommend that. I recommend finding out what chunk of time works for you, especially when you're starting out, when you're starting a creative practice. It can be very intense. You have to kind of feel into how much is too much again and how much is not enough. But the thing that I heard that was helpful for me is that about every 90 minutes, there's going to be, possibly for you, a desire to take some kind of a break, just a small break, just a pee break, or just a look outside the window and stretch for 30 seconds break. Then after about 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, I have found for many years now that's when I need to take a longer break. To have your focus on something very intensely for 3 hours, I have noticed that I am tired after that and I need to go for a walk, have something to eat, walk away from the work. Again, that's not always the way it is, but it tends to be that way. And I work better when I acknowledge that. And sometimes I come back to the work and work another 3 hours. Sometimes I work the whole day. But having those breaks allow me to, number one, avoid a lot of frustration or avoid going too far with a piece of work or overworking a piece of work. It's good to insert space into your recipe. So what we have so far is create yourself a space, a physical space. Figure out what time period in the day works for you. Figure out what that rhythm looks like. Maybe it's every day, maybe it's every weekend on a Saturday, whatever that rhythm is. And then have some kind of a check-in where you can, maybe it's every month, maybe it's every season, maybe it's every week, where you can check in with yourself and say, how's it going? Have I actually been showing up? What is working? What is not working? If you're not showing up and you're not doing the work, don't beat yourself up. That's just information. It's information that something in your setup isn't working for you and you need to examine that. So maybe your goals are too high. Maybe you need to do some shadow work with what's going on with your critic. You freaked yourself out. Think you're not actually into this thing that you would like to think that you're into, but you're just not into it. That's happened to me a lot of times in my life. I think something somebody else is doing is so fabulous and so creative and so beautiful. And then I try it and I'm like, that's not the tool that I have. They have their tool and it works with that, and my tool doesn't want to do that. So be true to all these things. Mona Lisa. Okay, so just a quick thought about, let's see, how did I say it? So anxiety and impatience versus discipline and practice. Just to touch on this briefly. Anxiety and impatience is often born of being product-oriented, driven by a search for approval, external sources of assurance, looking for identity, respect, attention, reading my notes. It's always there to some degree. There's always, I think, going to be some critical voice that's trying to come in. But if you find that it's dominating, then there's a call for a readjustment, to give yourself permission, especially with creative practice. And if you're starting out, please give yourself permission to play and explore. This was my number one mistake. I had been dabbling in painting for many years, as an example. And then I kind of finally threw up my hands and was like, I'm tired of having a day job. I'm an artist. I've been an artist for a long time. It's time for me to make paintings and sell them. When I put that emphasis on my work suddenly and finally like that, it was way too much pressure, and I basically freaked out. I started thinking I hated painting. I didn't want to do it. Every resistance in my entire being and inner child came out to have a tantrum. So discipline is not about force. It's about finding out how to meet yourself, how to, yes, show up when you don't want to show up when you're resisting, but show up because you really genuinely in your heart feel that this is a priority and it's worth showing up for. And checking in with yourself. Things change over time. So if you keep checking in with yourself, then you have the opportunity to acknowledge if time is going by and you've lost inspiration for this particular thing. Maybe you need a larger break. Maybe you just need to step away for a long period of time. Yeah, and especially again in the beginning with a creative practice, you've really got to throw the idea of goal-oriented productivity out the window. Just let yourself play and explore, please. I have more things to say about that, but I do believe that it murders all natural, spontaneous joy and creativity to put pressure on a creative impulse or a creative desire that is nascent, that is just being born. So notice, honestly, the state of mind that you're bringing to the work on any given day, and then in a general sense, just notice if you're on the rag and you're pissy. That day you might need to just lay on the floor. So notice what state of mind you're bringing to the practice. If you've had a shitty day or you're completely distracted by the fact that you've fought with your partner, you might not be able to work creatively. You might need to take a walk, or you might need to create a specific intention to work through that with your creative practice. I have absolutely found that if I'm distracted by some sort of emotional duress, I cannot ignore it. So my choices are either to stay in stillness until that feeling resolves itself, stay with that feeling until that feeling moves through me, or decide to allow myself to channel that feeling through my creative practice. Those are my choices. Or to walk away, to say, okay, for today, I'm just not in a space. I need to go and deal with this issue directly. I need to go for a walk. Especially if you're beginning with, say, a painting practice, I would suggest that you choose one thing that you really want to focus on. One thing, small thing, way smaller than you would think. Just exploring line work today. Just exploring mixing colors today. Just exploring the idea of a self-portrait, loose interpretation of a self-portrait today. Working with only pencils or only 3 colors. So I think you see what I'm saying is it makes it a lot easier and a lot less confusing, and also a lot more likely that you'll actually get to know your medium and can then progress and slowly add things in. I, being the human that I am, just tend to grab everything in sight and want to work like it's a buffet table. And for a long time, that was very torturous for me because it was confusing. It was overwhelming. I think overwhelm is my biggest demon in creative practice. So creating that container, making the time commitment small, making it so I don't have to do it every day and I've implicitly failed if I don't show up every day. Checking in and having that small palette of things to choose from. If I had adhered to those things in the beginning of my practice, I would have had a lot less pain and a lot of an easier time. So let's see if I left anything out here in my notes. Okay, in conclusion, something from my past teacher in one of my improvisational happened to be a music class, had what he called the deadly questions that take you out of the process, the deadly questions that you do not want to ask yourself when you're making art. And of course, once I tell you what they are, you do ask yourself, they come into your mind, but the point is to recognize when you're asking yourself these questions and be like, okay, that's why I just murdered my inspiration. So they are, why? Why am I doing this? Why? Is this a worthwhile thing for me to spend my time on? What is the meaning of this? Oh, that's the second question. What does it mean? It's art, you gotta let yourself just express what it means. Leave that up to the art critics later, or think about that afterwards. But asking what it means while you're doing it, especially, or at least in the beginning, murder. Is it good? Don't ask that question. A critique is valid, but a critique happens later. You have to be wise about when your work is ready to be critiqued and who it's critiqued by and how it's critiqued. There's nothing wrong with making observations. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that the work is ugly or you don't like it. But to be in the process of creative play, especially in the beginning, play is so essential. And to be asking yourself if it's good, if it's valid, valuable, if the world will like it, if this person will like it, if you'll be able to sell it, murder. One that goes, I'm going to add this question, one that goes with that for me equaled murder and still equals murder is, am I going to get paid for this? It goes with, is it good? But wrapping money up into the business, I think even once you are getting paid for making work, to judge your creative exploration by that productivity perspective, really, the two don't go hand in hand. Later, after you've established your creative practice, after you have started out, but I don't think it's helpful then either. You just make the work, and then you put it out for sale if that's the level that you're at. Asking while you're working is, how much am I going to make? Am I going to be able to sell this? Can I pay rent with this? It's probably going to be bad art. You're putting that thought form into your art. You're putting that fear-based poverty mentality into the work. So I recommend not doing it. Okay, that's enough for now on the subject of discipline and establishing a creative practice. I hope that was helpful. Thank you. I would like to explore